on this misty June gloom day here at Tree of Life Nursery. Believe it or not, summer is upon us, so today's workshop is going to be on gardening in the summer, or native gardening in the summer. And so this workshop was actually recorded last year, right about this time, and it was presented by our good friend of the nursery, former employee. Actually, Colin is somebody who trained me when I first started working here. But it's presented by Colin Dunleavy. He is an incredible horticulturalist and the owner of Liveforever Landscapes. So if you're looking for a landscaper, a designer, an installer, and somebody who can maintain and take care of really good native gardens, who's very competent, and Colin is your guy. And so I will leave his information also down in the comments. But yeah, let's see. So what Colin's going to talk about today is about highlighting some of the plants here at the nursery that we sell, but also gardens plants that give you that seasonal interest, that bloom throughout the summer. And he's also going to speak on some maintenance and care of those plants through the hotter summer season. So without further ado, let's give it over to Colin.
Coming into summertime though, what I like to do, especially in Southern California, and Tree of Life has a great setup of plants here to do this, where they expand out into areas of Baja California, our Sonoran Desert, and our Channel Islands. And through this, especially with our desert plants, and they tolerate planting more year-round. Our desert plants are used to monsoonal floodings and things like that, and they can tolerate it better. You have to be more mindful though. You have to look after your plants and care for them. With that said, situations though, like dealing with courtyards, shady spots, even pottery, that's something you can do all year round. It's relatively, when a plant's in a pot, its conditions are going to be the same as far as watering, so it's very easy to manage. And if the plant's going to burn out in the summer in a pot because it's the wrong plant, it doesn't matter when you plant it, it's going to happen anyways. So your selection is very important while picking out for your location. Really, first of all, you got to define where you're located. If you're in a coastal area, if you're more intermediate, if you're more inland. If you're dealing with an inland full sun planting, wait until fall. If you're dealing with intermediate and it's filtered sunlight, you can plant some things throughout the year. Coastal areas, you can get away with planting throughout the year. But what I like to do in summer, oh, Kevin, it shut down. Okay, so in summertime, expand out to easier plants to plant. Our riparian plants, warm season plants, anything with a bloom is going to tolerate planting a lot easier during the summertime. But make sure you're doing it correctly with your planting. You have to be really mindful of the location that you're planting in, and care for the plant. You're going to make sure you're going to irrigate your plants. You're going to water them. You can't just put them in the ground and leave them. You want to take care of them for at least the first year until they get more established, and then from there you can kind of slow down your watering and practices. Okay, and now to get into plants. This is a very beautiful plant, a Butylon Pomeroy. This is one of our desert plants. It is a mallow. It is a fairly rare mallow. I do have one back here. A little bit too big to pass around, but very easy to grow. I planted more of these just last week. With once a week watering, they get going fairly quickly, fast growth. Beautiful flower on it, and a very soft leaf, but just easy to maintain. Basically with this plant, after its flowers are done, you can deadhead the flowering stalks and it will keep it nice and full. If you can skip the slide. Here it is actually used in, this is a commercial property where we converted everything to predominantly native plants and fruit trees. And we ripped out all the non-native conventional commercial plants in this location, and we utilized the resources to grow food and grow native plants. And we use a lot less water because of the native plants, so we can put that water into things like avocado trees, heirloom tomatoes. In this row right here, in the cages right there are heirloom tomatoes. And heirlooms, a very important pollinator for heirloom tomatoes are our native bumblebees and our native bees in general. And what the plants do is they are going to bring in these very important pollinators. This is a Sonoran Bumble Bee right here, and they love any of these plants with cups. If you know, especially on a windy day, if you go and you look at these mallows and you look inside there, most likely you'll see a bee. Sometimes they're sleeping, sometimes they're just pollinating, and these bees will go in and pollinate all the vegetables in this garden, especially heirloom tomatoes. They're important for that. And then with that said too, they also bring in beneficial insects, which kind of keep everything at bay as far as pests. It keeps everything in balance. In this, we don't use any pesticides, no control. The only thing we really have to control are birds and wildlife eating the fruit. And then, so with that, you know, we use scarecrows and things like that. But we kind of just give and take and share. And we get enough for ourselves as well as for the birds and everything. Next slide. Kalyana Californica. One of my favorites. This is a little bit out of range in Baja, California. It's a very easy plant to grow. This one, I you know, plant it in fall, but I planted this throughout the year and have had good luck with it. It's a fast grower. They get about 5 by 5 feet. Here it is. They can grow. This one looks pretty spindly. This is a variety called Sierra Star, but I just wanted to pull it out to show you the flower. The flower looks about the same. Once they're in the ground, they look fantastic. They fill out. This will maintain a flower as long as you don't have heavy frost. It will maintain a flower all year. If you want a nice small plant that you can, in this situation right here, it's in very close quarters. It's in about a 3-foot bed up against a wall, and you can kind of use it as a natural espalier. And this is right outside a window, and you just watch the wildlife come in all year round. You have hummingbirds are very attracted to this plant. There's quite a few Rufus and Anna's hummingbirds that constantly fight over the territory of this plant, and it's fun to watch them always hovering through the garden. Marine blue butterflies. This is a nitrogen fixating plant. It does attract things like the blue butterflies, and I've seen all sorts of even bringing in just all sorts of native insects.
You say it grows to 5 feet?
Yeah, it grows to about 5 feet. You can keep it very narrow, or you can let it grow out into a shrub about the same, about 4 feet wide, 5 feet tall. But it tolerates pruning very well. You can open them up if you want to, keep them low. It's an easy plant.
We have some examples of them out in the demonstration garden around the pond, or the fountain out in Castle La Paz.
Does it tolerate this way soil? Do you have to manage soil?
Soils can be difficult. I mean, in San Clemente, we deal with soil types that there's a Santa Barbara shale that is just impossible to grow anything. And then so you have to consider that. Sometimes you have to try a plant and see if it works in your soil. But with the planting, the Kalyana, it is very tolerant to a lot of soil conditions. But I do when you're dealing with a 1-gallon pot, every nursery pot grown, it is going to be in a soil mix from the nursery. So when the whole is being planted, I always use amendments, but I'm mindful of the certain amendments, and I basically You mix in about a third into the native soil, and then so it just helps that transition of the plant coming from this amended soil, transitioning out into a mix, and then out into the native soil. It will help your plants quite a bit. But if you're dealing with clay, the most important thing to do with clay soil is to, when you dig that hole, make sure you break up those edges. Have somebody hit out those edges, or do it yourself to where it's jagged, it's not just smooth. I've seen that happen a lot of times where somebody will dig out a hole in clay soil, leave it very smooth, plant the plant in there, and it creates almost like a pot-like atmosphere where the root ball will just coil and you'll never see the plant really grow. You might get some height out of it, but they tend to burn out, and you can pull them out all at once because they never really get established. So yeah, amendments, play around with certain amendments. If you have a heavier clay soil, the Tree of Life potting mix, I use that every time. From manzanitas to ceanothus that are more sensitive, it works really well for that. For pottery and for amending the soil in the ground. I use it for both. It works very well. It's not overpowering. You have to, things that are going to kill your native plants are things that are high in nitrogen or fertilizer, things like manures and things like certain plants that, or certain soils that just bring in too much nutrition and they'll burn out the plant. So use something that is, like even like a cactus mix that you can get at Home Depot. That works well too, to mix in that with the native soil, with the clay soil. And then mounding your plants. If you're dealing with a heavy clay soil and you want to, you want something like a manzanita that needs well-drained soil, you can mound them up. Okay.
Baja fairy duster. Do they do okay in a pot and container?
You can, but they just they won't do as well as in the ground. They're much more robust and full in the ground. In a pot, I know, I'm pretty sure Mike Evans has used them quite a bit in smaller potteries, but it's almost like, because they do tolerate pruning, you can kind of bonsai them and do things like that, but better in the ground. And our next plant, this is another one reaching out to Baja California. This is, I will use this one as, it's a vining plant. It's very beautiful, very profuse blooms in the summertime. It does actively grow in the summer, so it is one that you're safe to grow in the summer, and you don't have to worry about overwatering it. It actually prefers a little bit of extra water during the summer to keep going. It will, if you live in an area of frost, it will die back to the ground, which is actually good for this plant because it can take off quite a bit. In coastal areas, you can tend to keep it green year-round, and then just kind of prune it out to shape. But it will cover full walls and provide a lot of beautiful flowers during the summer, give you a definite pop of color. And it does provide a lot of flowers for beneficial insects. This one is planted on the coast, and then it's in an area where it's up against the wall and it gets full sun and heat. It tolerates that really well. You can see other companion plants with a butylon. It's hard to see, but there's a Euphorbia misera behind that, which is a very rare plant from southern coastal California that works really well in raised beds. And so you can kind of mix in these little cheat plants from a little bit further out of range. The one with the white flowers is called Melanospodium. It is a Midwest plant. Works really well in native gardens. Will provide you a summer flower too. And the idea is to do a balance, to design your garden to be predominantly native. I always go in and I try to source out endemic local native plants as much as I can. And then from there, you have certain areas that you're just not going to be able to keep a native plant, or it just might not work. And then you can kind of expand out into these other areas of Baja California, Channel Islands, and the desert plants, and for our certain microclimates in our homes. And they work really well. This is Cercocarpus betuloides. You can find this one growing up in our chaparral in our mountains. It is a beautiful, beautiful feathery plume that it produces after its flower, it will produce the flower in springtime, and then afterwards it will follow these plumes, which can hold out, you know, through halfway through summer. They are fantastic screen plants. They will seed. They will move around. So like with a more narrow bed or an open space that you want to provide a good screen, that you want a shrub that only gets 12, 15 feet high, and they can be pruned out to keep them kind of narrow. But it's a great one for those areas. There are a few on the property out here. I don't know if they're still blooming. Yeah. Oh, there? Okay, cool. A little bit. It's starting to go to seed right now. Okay, good. Yeah, they're worth checking out. If you go up into more pristine habitat like the Santa Ana Mountains, you go up Silverado Canyon, you'll see them up there during the summer. Gorgeous plant, easy to use. Next, Dudleya. This is it's becoming more iconic now because unfortunately, because people are they're poaching these plants. They've become very popular and they always kind of been, but it seems like maybe with the internet and things like that, their popularity has grown. And people are unfortunately poaching these Dudleyas out of our natural habitat. And what's sad about that too is not too many people in California realize that we do have native succulents to our areas. A lot of our succulents that are planted in the gardens are sourced from all around the world, where we have a beautiful, diverse selection of these Dudleyas. They are the true signs of summer for me. Summer basically begins when these things are in full bloom, when their hands are out, and they do vary quite a bit. There's quite a few different varieties grown, you know, from coastal California even out to our desert regions. So you can find a spot for these Dudleyas in your gardens. With Dudleyas, it's important to, you know, the basics with them is you're going to have a few types. You're going to have ones like chalk Dudleya here, which forms a rosette. Those are ideal to plant in this situation where they're tilted off to the side. That way, during the rainy season, they're not going to act like a cup and just hold in water and rot out. They do a lot better that way, and they prefer the well-drained soil. This right here, this was I think I took this photo 4 or 5 years ago. That was when we were very much into the drought. This was right at, you know, right after spring, early summer. And everything else around it, all the buckwheats and the sagebrush, everything is very dried out in this area, and these Dudleyas are still performing. They come around. That's why they get the name Live Forever. I've seen them come and go in the landscape and die back and return years later. It's a cool plant. It's a very great accent plant. Varieties like this is another rare Dudleya that grows out in the hills here. You can see some driving up Ortega Highway. It's called Dudleya viscida. And with the plants like this that aren't in a rosette, these ones you can plant upright. Super easy to grow. Any ones like this, Dudleya edulis and a few other varieties. Viscida tolerates full sun really well. This is a good starting Dudleya to plant in your garden, and it is a rare one. I'm sorry? Oh, with frost? I mean, they tolerate a decent amount, but you know, we're talking about in the low 30s. I wouldn't bring it in a place that snows. But
they're typically growing on more northern facing hillsides, cliffs, things like that. So not where like the frost temperatures will really collect to make that. But yeah, they don't grow up in real higher soil. We do get frost here, but they're a little microclimate closer to the ground where they are.
yeah, and exactly, and they're usually nestled in places that retain heat and keep them pretty warm. But yeah, I haven't seen any Dudleyas where it snows. Yeah, but they'll go out far into you can see some in the deserts, And then, so they do expand out. So you can plant them in a lot of different areas, but mountain, that kind of changes things up. And that is something good to know. And when you live in a really specific area like that, like a mountain region where you do deal with snow, it's best to basically find a book or something like that that deals with the local native plants in that area, and then you can kind of fast track to see what works best in that area. But yeah, that's pretty specific. Okay, Epilobium, another beautiful summer blooming California native plant, California fuchsia. You'll see quite a few different varieties of this in the horticulture trade, varying from ground covers that stay very low to the straight species, which is now Epilobium canum. It used to be Epilobium californicum. This one is, Zetianaria. It went through quite a few name changes. But the straight species, Epilobium canum, it's a great filler plant. It provides really cool contrast with, do I have one out here? No, I don't have one out here, but you can see in the photo, yeah, it's got a very light, fuzzy leaf, so it provides really nice contrast with darker evergreen plants. And this one will be kind of the really last chaparral coastal sage scrub plant that you'll see out that puts on a bloom. That sometimes they can carry it through fall, but it's more midsummer to late summer it'll start blooming. I use them, not as a foundation plant. I'll use them as a filler, especially if if you're planting something slow growing like a manzanita or a coffee berry that's gonna take 5+ years to really give you something with some height. Epilobium is a good companion plant for that. It will fill out, it will provide shade for this plant, and by the time your Epilobium's gone through its cycles, this thing will be well established and looking good. And with the Epilobium canums, they can get leggy over time, but they also tolerate pruning to where after about a year in the ground after established, when you get to that 2-year mark and they become too leggy, you can cut them back to the ground fairly hard. Leave about anywhere from 2 to 4 inches of the plant and it will re-sprout. You do want to do your pruning when it's cooler out, especially heavy pruning. You can prune throughout the year, but if you're going to do any hard cutbacks on plants, first look up the plant, because certain plants are very specific on their pruning times, but rule of thumb is going to be in the late summer to fall time, as plants kind of finish up with their seeds and things like that. You can do a little bit of pruning to rejuvenate your plants and then to keep them looking nice in the landscape, or you can just leave them. It's totally up to you and like what you prefer. Erigeron glaucus, Seaside Daisy. This is this is up in Pebble Beach in Monterey, California. Another plant that works fantastic in our California gardens. Really beautiful flower that you'll see more. You'll see them periodically through the summer, through the fall time. But it's a low-growing plant. There are quite a few different varieties that vary in sizes, but basically they only get about a foot high, and they'll spread anywhere. Some will stay within that 2-foot range, and some can spread up to 3 to 5 feet. Fantastic ground cover. If you're gonna plant them inland, in more filtered sunlight to shade, but they do tolerate sun pretty well. The only thing with this plant is that it will put up a lot of flowers, and if you don't prune them out, it can kind of look leggy. It can kind of look like a porcupine, but it's really easy to resolve if you want to keep the plant looking really nice throughout the year. It's just deadheading the whole flowering stalk, taking it down pretty much to where it ends, and then even without the flowers, you just have a nice evergreen ground cover. A very easy one to plant. This one, I do plant this almost all year in coastal areas. Our buckwheats. We're going to go through a few different varieties of buckwheats. Buckwheats are the saviors of the California garden. One of the easiest plants to grow. If in certain sites, with certain soil conditions, especially with dealing with like Santa Barbara shale or just where you can't get plants to really grow, plant a buckwheat and you'll most likely get success out of it. Like I don't think I've ever killed a buckwheat in my life. And there's a lot to choose from. There's a lot of different flower colors to choose from our different buckwheats. We basically, because they grow, you know, from our Channel Islands all through California, and this variety is one of our island buckwheats from Santa Cruz. Really, really cool, different leaf than a lot of our California buckwheat. And these ones you can almost over time develop a shape like a manzanita. And you can do some pruning with them, or you can just leave them as a nice ground cover. That they tend to get about anywhere from 3 to 5 feet, depending on wind conditions. Easy to grow. It will set seed like other buckwheats, so you can move plants around. You can it's a good one to fill up space. Even in this area here, it's maybe about a 5-foot planter, and it fills that area out well, full sun. A pink flower on this one, and a huge one for habitat. Yes, there are, like a crocatum. That one's fairly slow. There are a few that that Grande rubescens too. It takes a little bit while to grow. It is a smaller plant. Grande rubescens is right here, but even with this one, once it gets started, it will set seed, and this variety actually, now that we're covering it, that's perfect. Growing here right to the left, and that shows you the contrast in the different buckwheat flowers. This is the arborescence right here, and then California buckwheat, where you have white flowers on the California buckwheat, a more light pink on the arborescence, and then this deep red on a grande variation rubescens, which is the red buckwheat. This is very easy to grow, really nice filler for small spaces, and it does provide a beautiful summer bloom. Gorgeous flower on these. And they stay pretty compact. They'll only get about 1 foot high, and this one, they can spread about 3 feet. If they have room though, and they seed, they can cover more ground, but you can always, prune them back or pull them out. One thing about buckwheats is that they really don't need any maintenance at all. You don't have to do anything to them. Just plant them and let them grow, and enjoy the habitat that they're going to bring in during the summertime. You will see something on this plant all throughout the year while it's blooming. And if you can skip to the next slide. California buckwheat, you'll see butterflies on these. This variety, this is our local California buckwheat, a straight species. This is definitely a go-to plant, especially with slopes, with difficult conditions, hot, full sun locations. Plant these, and it will provide that summer flower, which is also important. But not only that, this flower, which is my favorite part in summertime, is the insects, the butterflies, the birds. You're going to have remaining seed heads from sages and other native plants that bloomed in spring. You're going to start attracting a lot of beneficial wildlife. And you can, I sit in my yard and I watch the butterflies in the summertime, especially on hot days when you don't want to work, when you're not able to, when you shouldn't be. Just enjoy the wildlife. Next scene. This is getting into the transition of buckwheat. So when they start out, you have you're depending on the flower color, but really vibrant. A lot of them are going to be in the whites and pinks. This variety of St. Catherine's lace, it starts out with a white flower, but as summer progresses, they'll start to transition their colors into more of a rust. And in midsummer, I think they're gorgeous when they meet that transition. And even all the way through into fall, when your plants are just getting through their dormancy, they've slowed down their processes through summer, which is a good idea to allow them to do that in some respects. You don't want to burn out your plants. You don't want to overwater them so they put on a lot of new growth. You want to allow them to slow down in the summertime and go through their processes, and then, you know, see the transition as fall comes around and it cools off and you can start watering again. We start getting more rain. In late fall, when they look like they're spent, the flowers, and if you go out and you do hikes and that's all you see is the remnants of these buckwheat flowers, they're still going to provide for butterflies and birds, the seeds. They're still going to use them. So it's important. Like, I can't stress the buckwheat enough to plant these if you want to provide habitat. Very easy. Fallujah Paradox, another desert plant reaching out into our more warm season plants. Fallujah Paradoxa, this is a monotypic species. This is the only one of its type. It's a very unique plant. It is a warm season plant where it can go semi-deciduous in the winter. I don't recommend planting this one immediate in the coast. Same with a lot of our desert plants. They do prefer more dry heat, but even with this one is still planted in San Clemente. It's just about maybe, I want to say about maybe 8 to 10 miles off of the coast, where it's not going to get too much of the coastal influence. I don't have any of those. Okay. It will grow into about a 5 by 5 foot shrub. This very easy to maintain, tolerates pruning very well. It's got one of the most interesting flowers and seed plumes afterwards. It is in the rose family, so you are going to have this delicate white rose small flower that starts up in spring. And then after this flower is finished, it's going to develop into this plume, which just looks like clouds on this plant. They're just so fun to watch, and they'll do this all through summer. You'll get this process where you get a little bit more flowers and a little bit more plumes. A very good one too for pollinators, easy to grow, and you can plant this one in summer. Good for full sun, good as hedges. In the winter time, and when they fall into their semi-dormancy, they won't drop their leaves completely. They do keep the leaves just become a lot smaller, but that's also the ideal time to kind of prune these and shape them back. You can keep them fairly narrow if you have to in certain areas, but a great pop of color, great summer accent plant.
We have some welcoming you into Casa La Paz, as you can see us at this.
There's one right at the entryway. That's right, and that one's gotten big. It's a big one right there, and you know, if you wanted to, you could basically cut it down by half and let it fill out again. Our Snapdragons. This is another one of my favorite plants in getting into summer. I have this one trailing on a few shrubs at home, and you can use this one as a ground cover. It works very well in coastal areas. It is from our Channel Islands. It's a very rare plant in the wild. In a ground cover situation, it will spread. It can cover up to 10 feet plus. As a vine, it works as a fantastic vine or just trailing through shrubs, and it is a hummingbird magnet. You'll see the hummingbirds come from underneath, and just they're amazing acrobatics to get at this flower. Another property on the lower right corner, this one has roadrunners out, and they use the ground cover plants as protection, but also the open space around them to do their hunting. They love native gardens, and they're fun to watch. Gambilia, another snapdragon from Baja, California. Another good accent plant. These ones can grow fairly large, but you can also keep them upright. They're they are a convergent plant. They got a succulent aspects to them, so they work really well in desert type gardens. They can be pruned easily to keep them the size. This one, I've never heard of anyone killing this from pruning it badly. It's one that you can, if it gets too leggy, you can cut out. It does have a very small leaf on it, and with the flowers on these two, you know, you'll see them bloom almost throughout the year in our coastal conditions, but they predominantly more pick up in the spring, summer, and even a little bit in fall. A great hummingbird plant. Any tubular flowers, any plants with tubular flowers are going to be magnets for hummingbirds. So if you want hummingbirds, look to these Galvesias. There's also a variety called, what's the one, that tree of life? Firecracker. Firecracker is a really cool, more compact ground cover with a much larger leaf on it. Same beautiful type flower, and it was actually it was brought into the horticulture trade by Tree of Life Nursery. A great plant, really beautiful evergreen plant. And these ones are easy to grow. I've never had any issues with these, even in the worst conditions. They just seem to take off on their own and do really well. Justicia Californica, very similar to the Snapdragons. This one is reaching out into our desert areas. It transitions great into our California native gardens, our coastal areas. Being that it is a desert plant, it can tolerate full sun. It adapts to filtered sun okay, but it's better in full sun, hot conditions. It is going to be more active in the summertime. These ones can be pretty lackluster in the winter, but that's always a good time to kind of prune them out and shape them. There's a few different varieties of these that vary in sizes. There's one that I forget the name that's more kind of vine-like. I haven't. Yeah, no, just this. No, that's different. That's the big leaf one.
Shrimp-like one.
It gets a lot bigger. You used to have one growing in the corner back there. I think it was cut down. But they are shrubs. They can get, you know, they tend to stay in about the 4 by 4 foot range. They can be pruned out. Excellent filler plants. And once again, it will provide that summer bloom, that pop of color. So it's a good one to add into the native garden. Another one of my favorites for getting into late spring and summertime are these Chaparral Mallos, another magnet for our native bee species. And these, I don't really bother about the European honeybee and saving the bees in that regard. I focus on the very underlooked, our native bee species, which are more prominent. They're very specialized bees, and they're solitary bees, which means you're not dealing with hives. You'll rarely have any issues with being stung by these bees. I believe even with the Sonoran, the bumblebees, they can sting, but they don't want to. They'll use it as a very last defense. Like if you grab the flower with one in there, then it might get you. But otherwise, you won't see any issues with these bees. They do need habitat though. And even in our California native gardens, if in the early stages, you want to mulch to kind of suppress weeds, but if you constantly keep a thick layer of mulch down in your gardens, you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities for these native bee species. There's also nesting boxes. There's ones that will use logs and things like that, so you can provide your own little nesting area for these, but open space is ideal. Leaving a spot in your garden if you do have room for it with just some bare soil to start to get these to move through. And they are just, they're very interesting looking. This is a digger bee. They're fuzzy. They're so cool to watch. And you won't have any issues with them coming up to you and trying to sting you. Yeah, these are. You'll have a mix of ones that nest in the ground and then ones that nest in logs, cavity nesters. Question?
So that's what confused me. So that's why you don't want
The heavy mulch. Yeah, I mean, if I tend to I start to with like a landscape, you know, that's in its 3-year mark, or even some that I maintain that are in their 10-year, 20-year existence. When the plants are fully established and you're not really using the mulch to cool down the younger plants, then you know just you don't need to put it down anymore. It looks really nice, but you do provide more habitat by leaving open spaces. Yeah.
So I have a few Chaparral Mallow, and they are, the way I purchased them, they are growing with this long stalk, and then they're blooming out. So they have this skinny, like foot tall.
Yeah.
To begin with, and they look really funny. So I just need to be patient, I guess.
Which variety is that? It's one of the Chaparral Mallows. Yeah, they'll do that. They basically. Can I grab my water from you? No, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
These ones, you know, you have to be. They do colonize. They'll put up a lot of plants. They'll develop, and then you know those colonies can almost die back, and the plant will move again. So I try to keep this plant and use it on slopes and situations like that. But you can use them pretty well in even smaller spaces and use them as a hedge. But yeah, that's totally natural with the growth. They'll start to put up stalks and they'll start to expand and fill out, and then they'll seed from that point and spread. So provide space for them where you plant them. But you know, I wouldn't worry about it. I wouldn't worry about it until you start seeing new growth. Once you start seeing new growth out of the base, then you can prune off that stalk to kind of help it to fill out more. But usually just leave a plant in the ground for the first 6 months to a year before you do anything to it.
In the fall, do you prune to reshape in a cultivated space the Chaparral Mallow so that they
Yeah, you can. I mean,
don't get too rangy?
they can. Yeah, they can. But you can. You know, you can prune them back at that time just to get them looking nice. You can deadhead the flowering stalks, but I prefer to plant this one off in the distance somewhere where I can enjoy its color, and then as it falls into its dormancy, I just leave it, and then it'll come back to life.
But it won't hurt if you wanted.
No. You can open these up. I mean, I've even seen a situation where people will prune these out into small trees. Whenever you do that kind of stuff, not a tree, but you know, a narrow, keep it very narrow. But anytime you do that with plants that want to, you know, be a large shrub, you'll weaken it a little bit. You can do that, but you will weaken it. It might have a shorter life, and you know, at that point you could cut the plant back and let it start over again.
Well, we have a lot of wind where it can go space, but I don't. If you get things too tall, then things start to get negatively affected by strong winds that come about. You know, so.
Yeah, these ones they grow fairly close to the coast. I mean, they tolerate wind conditions well. Yeah. Sprawl Sea of Sulphur, apricot mallow, beautiful summer bloomer. This is another one that is you're going to find this one in our desert regions. It tolerates, even fairly close to the coast conditions. It adapts pretty well. Not immediate coast, not to where you can walk to the beach, but certain homes, I planted this one in courtyards right along the coast, and that retain a little bit more heat, and they adapt really well. Fantastic, almost. There might be a certain point in summer where you won't see much blooms out of them. At that point, you can deadhead them back, and then they'll bloom right back again. Easy to maintain as far as once they kind of finish off. Maybe about once a year to once every 2 years, you can cut them back about half, and they'll resprout and come back to life. Or you can leave them, but after a certain point, they can get leggy, and I do prune them back. There are a few different varieties of this one. This is the straight species of the apricot mallow. I do plant these ones throughout the year. They do okay. with basically with slopes, with small spaces, anywhere in the garden, they can get about anywhere from 3 by 3 to 4 by 4 feet. Seasonal water, not really. You know, even they tend to just put on more growth. If you overwater anything, you might lose it. But these ones, I've never had any issues. I've put them in the spots with plants that do tolerate a little bit more. But you know, they can tolerate up to about once every 2 weeks of water, even established, and be fine. Even up to once a week in certain spots.
But not in summer.
Not in the summertime. Summertime, if it's a new plant, you know, sometimes you want to water your plants about once a week to keep them going. But in summer, being that it is a desert plant, it can tolerate, you know, some summer moisture.
This one of your jobs?
Yeah, this is actually a variety of the ambigua called Lewis Hamilton, and it has rose flowers. You will see a few different varieties of this plant, ranging from pinks to reds, and then the apricot mallow with the apricot color. This is over that fence is the coast. This is you know, fairly immediate coast, and they do very well in those conditions. And once again, it just provides that pop of color when you don't see much things bloom. There are certain situations where it is ideal to do that and utilize these plants in those areas. It provides all the same benefits as the other ones. You'll see tons of bees in here, caterpillars, anything with those all the mallows with the cup flowers are just really important for our native bee species. This is more of a spring bloomer. I threw it in here because I'm on the subjects of mallows. I do like this plant. It is a very rare one from the San Clemente Islands. It's very easy to grow. A lot of our mallows they're easy to grow. You can't go wrong with them. If you want pops of colors, you know, throughout the season, use them. Most of them are going to be around late spring to and then a little bit through summer, and then, you know, some of them even expanding out to fall time. This one, it provides a different color. The leaf is a little bit darker green. It is one that it does like to move over time. It will seed, and you'll get quite a few other plants. So you can provide it some space, but even in small spaces, you can keep them fairly compact and trained. Very easy to grow with the mallows. What's that?
It goes a lot with rhizomes too. They'll come up.
Yeah. It will form colonies where the desert mallows don't really. Reaching down to Guadalupe Island, this is off the coast of Baja California. This Sprawl Sea of Sulphur. It's pretty unique. It's got the white flower, the same kind of mallow leaf. I've never had one of these die on me from planting them at the wrong time. It's a very easy plant to grow. Does fantastic on the coast, and, you know, even inland. I do prefer them on the coast for harder areas. They work great on slopes. They are fairly low to the ground. I mean, they can get upwards to about 4 feet, but they you know, you can keep them at about 3, and then they'll spread from there about 4 feet wide. They're fast growers too. You know, with these plants and with a lot of our fast growing species, you want to use them as fillers with your foundation plants when you first plant. They're going to provide you with color, filling up space for those first you know, 2 to 5 years while your foundation plants really become established. Sometimes with these though, you know, after you reach that, when you get into that 6-7 year range, they can burn out. I'm replacing a few of these now that have just burned out after about, you know, they're planted in I haven't planted even narrow parking strips, and they've done well surrounded by heat. But after about 6-7 years, they can burn out in those difficult conditions, and be replaced. But if you want, you know, something pretty immediate, a great filler for your other landscape plants, this is an excellent way to go. And getting into, you know, even in summertime, even the plants that you want to plant in fall, with our manzanitas, coffee berries, ceanothus, those ones I rarely will try to reach out of fall planting season to try to get these in the ground and get them started. But with that said, especially manzanita, it's one of the most beautiful plants that you'll ever come across. It's one of my favorites, and they will look nice all year around. This is Howard McMahon to the left. I just pruned that one out. It's basically, with manzanitas, you're dealing with many different varieties, from, you know, ones that can be sculpted into small trees, shrubs to ground covers. A lot of the ground covers are sourced or selected from coastal regions, where they do actually want a little bit more water, being a coastal plant. And in coastal conditions, you know, you're kind of safe with planting those and giving them a little bit of extra water during the summer. Most of them, though, you know, only about once a month watering for established plants. This one I don't water at all anymore. There is a lawn adjacent to it, which its root, you know, it's probably reached into now, and that provides all the water it needs. And the little touch that manzanitas do, this is a very fast-growing one. This is one of the larger varieties called Refugio, and during this time of the season, you'll get new growth out of these manzanitas, and they're really beautiful. They almost look like a flower itself. Let me pass that around. So wait for these in fall, but enjoy them in summer. They stay like that all year. They tend to bloom in, some of the earliest ones will bloom in later fall, winter to spring, and then it's a beautiful white bell-shaped flower. After it produces the flower, it's going to produce a berry, and I believe the term Arctostaphylos, it has to do with the grizzly bear, the berry. And that used to be manzanitas. You can find them just continuing up Ortega Highway, growing up in the higher reaches. Just huge stands of manzanitas. A lot of them, unfortunately, were lost during the Holy Fire along the main Divide Road. I don't even know if that's opened up yet. And our California grizzly bear used to eat the berry that it provided, the manzanita berry, and yeah.
Manzanita meaning little apple.
Yeah.
For the shape of the flower itself, actually looks like a little apple, and then gorgeous fruit that comes after.
Yeah, exactly, and it is edible. People make beverages, ciders, yeah.
I had a McMinn manzanita that was huge, and when it was in bloom, white, every single bloom had a bumblebee on it. I came home, and I felt like this dancing on the flowers, and I went up to it. I could not believe how many bumblebees were on this thing.
And I'm glad you mentioned that too, because it is very important to provide nectar for native bees with our early blooming manzanitas, because it hits an area where, you know, a time of the season where not much else is blooming. So it's a great one for, not only it looks nice, but it's gonna provide for the native bees.
Some of those flowers as they drop too would make this
The snow covered, our winter in California. Okay, and another evergreen shrub that, you know, these ones too I plant in fall, it's just easier to use them, is lemonade berry, Rhus integrifolia. This is a very diverse shrub to small tree that you can do just about anything with that you want in the landscape. From using it as a screen plant, there's a great example of some back here, I don't know if you've seen those, where they created basically a garden wall out of it, a natural screen. And they tolerate hedging. Your gardener can't kill this plant from doing anything wrong with it. You can do just about anything. In this case, I pruned them out into a small tree. These plants, and there's 3 others on this property, actually came up by seed, and in about, and they reached this point in about 8 years, where they're about 15, 16 feet high. And with opening it up, it just provides more space, but you can leave them as large shrubs if you want to. You can leave them as screens. I like to open older specimens up into small trees where they work for that. And we do on this property, there is a roadrunner that lives out in this property. And once again, with that, we give it open space. I don't mulch at this property anymore. We leave it for the wildlife, the native bees, the hunters like the roadrunners, all the lizards and everything, and it works quite well. And skip once more, and then reaching into a few other evergreen plants. Adenostoma is chamise. You'll see these growing up, the large shrub varieties you'll see growing up in the Santa Ana Mountains. It's one of the predominant species out there in certain sections. Very dark evergreen leaf on it, almost kind of like rosemary without the scent. This variety, this was another one selected by Tree of Life Nursery. I believe they got out and took the cuttings. I believe so. I'm not 100% sure. I'll talk to Mike about that, but I'm pretty sure. You should check that out. It's a.
Someone gave us some cuttings.
Okay.
I loved how it grew,
And then you kept it going from there.
I don't
Okay.
think it's San Nicolas Island.
You don't think if they can't get it past
I
there?
push for field trips to collect. Did we introduce Nicholas?
Yeah, by that name. Someone else gave us the
Okay, so there's part of that.
we made the name because the name that was given to us was Prostrata. Yeah. You're not supposed to use a Latin name on a cultivar.
Okay, that answers it. And
Plant laws.
I know all the plant rules. This is being from the island. It's a prostrate form. It's makes a beautiful ground cover. And I say that with a question mark because if you do plant these inland where they don't have coastal windswept influences, you can see some of those examples out here. They can get some height to them. They maintain that shrub form, but I've seen them get up to 4 or 5 feet high. Where in coastal conditions, more windy conditions, they'll stay fairly low. They can be pruned too to keep them lower. It's just a beautiful evergreen, clean plant, and easy to grow. It tolerates a lot of different conditions. This is another plant that I'll bring into where I've lost a lot of plants that didn't work that I wanted to try first. I'll plant this one, and it tends to get going and do all right. They can be slow growing in the beginning, but once they kind of fill out, they'll remain permanent. They're just a good foundation plant. And below that is grasses. Grasses are another one that you can't really go wrong with, especially with the deer grasses. Canyon Prince Wild Rye is right here. This is a prostrate form of our giant wild rye, which grows out here. This is another island plant. I like using this one because it stays a little bit more compact. Beautiful bluish green leaf on it. And with grasses, you can give them extra water during the summer. If you have a spot that's near a lawn or a neighbor's lawn, that takes a little bit more water, especially with deer grass. It's a great idea to use these as a transition before you get into more of your drought-tolerant natives. And, provide space for them. Make sure you look that up. These ones can spread quite a bit. In this area right here, it's a very narrow planter, and so that will keep them contained to some degree, but they work really well in those conditions. And this is a purple 3-on next to that. And that is it. That is the end of my slide, and I can answer any questions.
Purple 3-on, when do you like to cut those back?
Well, rule of thumb is kind of when they finish flowering, and then you can cut them back after that point. The purple threon, you know, you'll get more plants coming up than you have to cut back. It will seed, whereas like you know, some of the other grasses like the Lamus, this one will more spread by runners, and same with the Juncus. But purple threon will seed. There is a very invasive plant. It's the Mexican feathergrass that is used all over, and I think people are finally trying to reduce that down. It becomes a huge issue. This is purple threon's a good substitute for that. You do have to be mindful of it. Either provide space for it or plant it in a spot that you're okay with it, you know, developing into a meadow. But if you want it, you can control it. You can pull them up, but you have to, you know, be ready for that.
Do they have sharp serrated shoots?
Not the purple threon. The Lamus does. There's a little bit of a sandpapery fill on these, but you know, if you get it right, you could get a paper cut on it. What Juncus? This is Juncus Juncus patens. This was actually. Could you show the first photo? There's quite a few Juncus varieties. With Juncus patens tends to be more compact in about the 3 by 3 foot range, where you know, there's other ones, the basket rust Juncus textalis, which will get much higher. I love using these in pots. What's cool about our rushes is that, you know, not only can they tolerate seasonal flooding and a dry riverbed and things like that, or certain situations like by a lawn, but they also can adapt very well to our drought. So they work great in pots. You just have to be mindful of their spread. So this one doesn't really spread too aggressively where the basket rush will. So in pots or an area where it can be contained, or an area that you're okay to let it go, they're fantastic. But I just like the architectural form on them too. You know, certain contrasts they provide, the shadows they make, very easy to grow plant. Okay.
All right, thank you so much, Colin.
Thank you. One thing, sorry, Asclepias, and you know, with we do have plants, riparian plants, warm season plants that you're gonna, during the summertime you can plant them. You want to water them more, especially if you're dealing with like a sycamore and something like that. It's always ideal to wait for the fall, where you have the help of nature and the rain and the cool. But things like Asclepias, this is a plant that will die back to the ground in winter, and they're actively growing now. You can plant these. This is the host plant for the monarch butterfly. If you want to attract the monarch, you want to help the monarch, plant local native species of Asclepias. I don't plant any of the South Americans. Even though they're not considered invasive, they do spread quite a bit in the landscapes, and they don't die back during the winter, which can create issues. They're still doing more research on that for the monarchs, but our native species are great. You can plant these now too.
All right, thank you everyone. Thank you for joining us on this workshop. Can't believe it, it is summer, as I am basically sitting in a drizzle right now, but it was a lot of fun. Colin is, as you saw, gives a lot of great information. I can give you guys his contact information. It's in the chat, but also we have his cards and can give that information to you here at the nursery as well. Yeah, thank you all for joining. I will also post resources for summer watering and different summer planting guides as well. There's a link in the comments, but we'll post it again on our social media. So I hope you guys are enjoying these workshops, and we'll see you next time.